16-year-old Amara Lewis walked home from her evening boxing class, her gym bag slung over her shoulder. The dimly lit streets of her neighborhood were quiet, but she remained alert, just as her coach had trained her. Years of martial arts and self-defense had made her confident, but even she knew that danger could appear at any moment. As she turned the corner onto a quieter street, she noticed a group of young men leaning against a brick wall. Their eyes locked onto her, and she could feel the weight of their stares. A pit formed in her stomach, but she didn't let fear show on her face. "Hey, look what we got here," one of them sneered. He was tall, muscular, and had a cocky smirk plastered across his face. "You lost, little girl?" Amara ignored them and kept walking, gripping the strap of her bag a little tighter. She had dealt with harassment before, but something about these guys felt different, more threatening. "Where do you think you're going?" Another one called out, stepping into her path. He had a shaved head and a tattoo on his neck. "You think you're too good to talk to us?" Amara took a slow breath, assessing the situation. There were 4 of them, bigger than her, older than her. But she knew size wasn't everything in a fight. She had trained for years, and she understood that most people underestimated her because of her age and gender. "Not interested," she said calmly, stepping to the side. But they didn't let her pass. Instead, they circled her, their sneers turning into something more menacing. "You think you're tough, huh?" one of them taunted. "Bet you won't be so mouthy when we're done with you." Amara's heart pounded, but not from fear, from focus. She knew she might have no choice but to fight. Amara's mind raced as the gang tightened their circle around her. She kept her stance relaxed, but her muscles were ready to spring into action. She had been trained to stay calm under pressure, to read her opponents before making a move. One of the gang members, the one with the tattooed neck, cracked his knuckles. "Ain't so tough now, are you?" he sneered, stepping closer. Amara's eyes flickered between them, analyzing their body language. They weren't trained fighters, just street bullies who thought they had power in numbers. That was their mistake. Another one reached for her bag. "Why don't you hand that over, sweetheart?" he smirked. Big mistake. With lightning speed, Amara twisted her body, yanking her bag out of his reach while simultaneously driving her elbow into his gut. He gasped, doubling over, and she wasted no time. She delivered a sharp sidekick to his knee, sending him collapsing to the ground. The others stood frozen for a second, stunned by how fast she had moved. But shock quickly turned to anger. "You little—" The tattooed guy lunged at her, swinging wildly. Amara ducked, feeling the rush of air as his fist barely missed her head. She countered instantly, landing a precise jab to his jaw, followed by a powerful kick to his ribs. He stumbled back, cursing in pain. The remaining 2 hesitated now, realizing this wasn't going to be an easy target. Amara took a step back, hands up, her breathing controlled. "You can still walk away," she said firmly. "Your choice." But their pride was hurt, and that made them dangerous. One of them pulled out a knife. Amara's heart pounded. This fight was far from over. The cold gleam of the knife caught the dim streetlight as the gang member twirled it in his hand. His smirk was gone, replaced by a determined glare. "You think you're tough?" he spat. "Let's see you dodge this." Amara's heart pounded, but she didn't let fear take over. Fear clouded judgment, and right now, she needed clarity. Her grandfather had taught her how to handle armed opponents. Never focus on the weapon, focus on the person holding it. The gang member lunged, thrusting the knife toward her stomach. Amara sidestepped swiftly, grabbing his wrist and twisting it at a sharp angle. He screamed as the blade clattered to the ground. Before he could react, she delivered a crushing knee strike to his midsection, sending him sprawling. The other 2 hesitated, their confidence shaken. They had expected an easy victim, but Amara was proving to be something else entirely. Tattooed neck growled in frustration. "Enough of this!" He reached into his pocket, pulling out a second blade. Amara knew she couldn't let them regain control. She took a deep breath and moved first. She dashed forward before he could react, sweeping his legs from under him. As he fell, she grabbed his wrist, applying just enough pressure to make him drop the knife. It hit the pavement with a dull clang. The last standing member turned and ran without a second thought. Amara stood her ground, breathing heavily. The 2 on the ground groaned in pain, their threats silenced. She stepped back, keeping her guard up just in case. A distant siren wailed in the background. Someone must have called the police. Amara exhaled. This fight was over, but something told her this wasn't the last she'd see of them. The sound of sirens grew louder, bouncing off the alley walls. Amara stayed alert, her stance still firm as she watched the two gang members groaning on the ground. The third one had vanished into the shadows, running like his life depended on it. She knew she had to make a decision: stay and explain everything to the police, or leave before things got more complicated. But before she could move, flashing red and blue lights illuminated the street. A patrol car screeched to a stop, and two officers stepped out. One of them, a stocky man with sharp blue eyes, immediately placed his hand on his holster. "Hands where we can see them," he ordered. Amara slowly raised her hands, knowing how quickly situations like this could turn deadly. The other officer, a tall woman with a skeptical gaze, looked at the men groaning on the pavement. "What the hell happened here?" Tattooed Neck clutched his arm, trying to play the victim. "She attacked us," he groaned. "We were just walking, and she jumped us like some crazy chick." Amara clenched her jaw. "Lying cowards." The stocky officer narrowed his eyes at her. "That true?" Amara took a deep breath. "No, they surrounded me, harassed me, and pulled knives on me. I defended myself." The female officer raised an eyebrow. "You? Against them?" Amara didn't answer. She let the scene speak for itself. Two gang members lay defeated, one too scared to even fight. The officers exchanged glances. "We'll need you to come with us," the stocky officer said. Amara's pulse quickened. She wasn't in trouble, was she? But she had no choice. She nodded, keeping her expression neutral. As they placed the gang members in cuffs and led them toward the car, Amara noticed something, Tattooed Neck smirking at her. It wasn't over. This was just the beginning. The police station was colder than Amara expected, both in temperature and atmosphere. She sat in a dimly lit interrogation room, her hands resting on the metal table in front of her. A two-way mirror covered one wall, and she could feel unseen eyes watching her. The door creaked open, and the female officer from earlier walked in. She set a file down and pulled up a chair. Amara Hayes, age 17, lives with her grandmother, no criminal record, straight-A student. Impressive. Amara stayed silent, keeping her posture calm but alert. The officer leaned forward. "You really expect me to believe that two grown gang members armed with knives got beaten down by a teenage girl?" Amara met her gaze without flinching. "That's exactly what happened." The officer studied her, tapping a pen against the table. "So, you're saying they attacked you first?" "Yes." "Do you have any proof?" Amara exhaled. She knew how this worked. It wasn't about truth. It was about evidence. The gang members were probably spinning a different story in the other room. The door opened again, and the stocky officer entered. "We checked the security footage from a nearby store," he said, tossing a file onto the table. "She's telling the truth." The female officer raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "Clear as day," he replied. "The guys cornered her. They pulled knives first. She defended herself." Amara felt a small wave of relief but didn't let it show. The female officer sighed, flipping through the report. "Well, that changes things." She looked back at Amara. "You're free to go." Amara stood up. "What about them?" "They'll face charges for attempted assault," the stocky officer said. "But something tells me this isn't over for you." Amara nodded. She knew he was right. The gang wouldn't take this humiliation lightly. As she walked out of the station, she felt the weight of unseen eyes on her again. The fight was far from over. Amara stepped out of the police station and into the cold night air. The city hummed around her. Cars passing, distant sirens wailing. But something felt off. Her instincts, trained from years of martial arts and self-discipline, told her she wasn't alone. She tightened her hoodie and started walking toward the bus stop. Her grandmother would be worried, and Amara didn't want to stay out any longer than necessary. But as she reached the corner, a black car idled near the curb, its engine low and steady. The tinted window rolled down just enough to reveal a face she recognized. Jace, the gang leader. His nose was still swollen from the earlier fight, and a fresh cut ran along his cheekbone. His eyes burned with quiet rage. "You got lucky," he said, his voice smooth but dangerous. "Cops won't always be there to back you up." Amara didn't flinch. "I don't need them." Jace smirked. "Tough girl. But here's the thing. You embarrassed my crew. You made us look weak. His fingers drummed on the door. That's a problem. Amara clenched her fists but forced herself to stay calm. Your guys attacked me. That's your problem. Jace leaned forward. No, sweetheart, it's your problem now. The car door opened slightly, and another gang member stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, a scar across his neck. He stared at Amara with cold eyes. Jace continued, You think you can walk away from this? You don't know how things work. I know enough, Amara shot back. Jace chuckled. Then you should know this. You're marked. We don't let disrespect slide. You'd better watch your back. The car door slammed shut, and the vehicle sped off, tires screeching against the pavement. Amara stood still for a moment, heart pounding but face unreadable. She wasn't afraid of them, but she knew one thing for sure. This fight wasn't over. It had just begun. Amara walked home with a fire burning inside her. Jace's threat didn't scare her, it fueled her. If they thought she would back down, they were dead wrong. As she stepped inside her grandmother's house, she found Nana Evelyn sitting in her favorite chair, knitting. She glanced up, her wise eyes scanning Amara's face. You all right, baby? Amara hesitated. She didn't want to worry her grandmother, but she also knew she couldn't hide things from her. I had a run-in with some guys again, she admitted, dropping her bag by the door. Nana Evelyn sighed and set down her knitting. I told you, child, some people don't take kindly to strength, especially when it comes from someone they don't expect. Amara sat on the couch. I can handle myself, Nana. Her grandmother gave her a look that could cut through steel. I know you can, but fighting with fists is one thing, fighting with wisdom is another. These boys won't stop because you beat them once. They'll want revenge. I know, Amara said, clenching her jaw. That's why I need to be ready. Nana Evelyn nodded slowly. Then you do what you have to, but always remember, violence ain't always the answer. But when it is, make sure you finish it so they don't come back. Amara spent the rest of the night training. She set up her punching bag in the backyard and let loose, perfecting her strikes, refining her footwork. Every punch carried the weight of her determination. Every kick reminded her she was not powerless. She went over her mental strategies as well. If they attacked her again, she wouldn't just react, she would control the fight. She studied their weaknesses from the last encounter, knowing that next time she had to be even sharper. As the night deepened, she stood beneath the stars, breath steady, body strong. They thought they could break her. They had no idea what was coming. Amara knew that waiting for Jace and his gang to make the next move would be a mistake. She had to stay ahead, to be ready before they even realized what hit them. She spent the next morning mapping out her plan. If Jace was as predictable as she thought, he would try to corner her again, this time with even more numbers. She needed to be prepared. At school, she kept her head down, but her senses were on high alert. She noticed the way Jace and his crew whispered to each other when she walked past. Their smirks and quiet laughs told her everything she needed to know. They were planning something. By lunchtime, she had it figured out. Jace's right-hand man, Kurt, was hanging around her locker too much. Another one of their guys, Devin, kept glancing her way, as if checking her movements. It was obvious. They were waiting for the right moment to strike. Fine. She'd give them their moment. Instead of avoiding the confrontation, Amara decided to control it. She made sure to walk home at her usual time, following the same route as always, past the abandoned lot near the old train station. It was the perfect place for an ambush. She knew they'd follow her. She even slowed her steps a little, making it easier for them to catch up. When she heard the sound of approaching footsteps, more than just one or two, her heart pounded, but not in fear, in anticipation. Amara stopped in the middle of the lot and turned around. Jace and his gang stood there, 6 of them this time, blocking her exit. Jace grinned, confidence radiating off him. Look who finally stopped running, he sneered. Amara smirked. Who said I was running? The gang stepped forward, tightening their circle around her. They thought they had her trapped, but they were the ones walking into a fight they couldn't win. The moment was tense, the air thick with anticipation. Jace and his gang surrounded Amara, their faces twisted in smug amusement. They thought they had won, that she was just another scared teen about to beg for mercy. But Amara wasn't scared. Jace cracked his knuckles. You've been acting real tough, but let's see how tough you are now. One of the boys, Devin, lunged at Amara first, aiming to grab her arm. Big mistake. With lightning speed, she sidestepped, using his momentum against him. A swift pivot of her hip sent him tumbling forward. Before he could recover, Amara delivered a sharp elbow to his ribs, knocking the wind out of him. The others hesitated, startled by how quickly Devin went down. But Jace wasn't backing down. "Get her!" he barked. Two more rushed at her. Amara ducked, dodging the first swing aimed at her head. With a fluid motion, she caught the second attacker's wrist, twisted it hard, and yanked him forward. He yelped as he crashed into his friend, both of them stumbling to the ground. "Damn it," Jace growled, clearly frustrated. The remaining gang members looked uncertain now. They had underestimated her, and it was costing them. Amara stayed light on her feet, her stance steady. She had trained for this, spent years in martial arts classes, perfecting every move, every reaction. Jace clenched his jaw. "You think you're something special, huh?" Amara tilted her head. "No, I just think you're sloppy." Anger flared in his eyes. He wasn't going to let this go. He stepped forward, cracking his knuckles again. "All right then," he hissed. "Let's see how you handle me." Amara's muscles tensed. She had taken down his crew, but Jace, he was different. Stronger, faster, more ruthless. This fight was far from over. Jace's eyes burned with fury as he stepped closer, cracking his neck. His pride was on the line now, and there was no way he'd let some girl embarrass him in front of his crew. Amara, however, remained calm. She had trained for moments like this, against opponents bigger, stronger, and more aggressive. Jace fit the description perfectly. He launched his first strike, a wild right hook meant to take her head off. But Amara was faster. She ducked, pivoted on her heel, and drove a sharp kick into his knee. Jace staggered, cursing under his breath. "You little," he snarled, recovering quickly. He came at her again, this time feinting a punch before aiming a knee toward her ribs. Amara barely dodged in time, twisting away and countering with a swift jab to his jaw. The impact stunned him, but it also made him angrier. "You think you're tough, huh?" Jace growled, rubbing his face. Amara didn't answer. She didn't need to. Jace lunged again, faster this time, grabbing for her arm. He managed to grip her wrist, but Amara twisted her body, using his own strength against him. With a smooth motion, she flipped him over her shoulder, sending him crashing to the ground. The gang members stood frozen. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Jace was their leader. He never lost. Jace groaned, pushing himself up, but Amara was already standing over him. "Stay down," she warned. But Jace wasn't one to listen. He wiped blood from his lip, eyes dark with rage. "You're gonna regret this," he spat. Amara's fists tightened. She knew he wasn't done, and neither was she. Jace refused to stay down. He pushed himself to his feet, his face twisted in fury and humiliation. His gang watched in stunned silence. This was their leader, their toughest fighter, getting beaten by someone they had underestimated. Amara held her ground, her breathing steady. She had been in countless sparring matches, but this wasn't a gym, this was real. And she knew Jace wasn't going to back down without a final attempt to save face. He charged at her, this time with reckless aggression. No technique, no strategy, just pure anger. Amara read his movements, sidestepping at the last second. As he stumbled forward, she delivered a precise elbow strike to his ribs, making him gasp. Before he could recover, she swept his legs out from under him, sending him crashing onto the pavement again. Jace coughed, rolling onto his back. He tried to get up, but his body wouldn't cooperate. He was done. The rest of the gang hesitated, looking between each other. Some of them shifted uncomfortably, as if questioning whether they had picked the right leader. "Anyone else?" Amara asked, her voice firm but controlled. No one stepped forward. The power dynamic had shifted in a way none of them had expected. Jace groaned, spitting to the side. "This isn't over," he muttered, glaring up at her. Amara exhaled slowly. She knew guys like him. He wouldn't let this go. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone must have called the cops. Amara took one last look at Jace before turning to walk away. She wasn't afraid of him, but she also knew this was far from over. The flashing red and blue lights painted the alleyway as the police cars skidded to a stop. Officers rushed out, hands on their holsters, scanning the scene. The gang scattered, their bravado crumbling as they darted in different directions. Jace, still on the ground, groaned as he tried to pull himself up. Amara didn't move. She had done nothing wrong, and she wasn't about to run like she was guilty. A tall officer with a stern expression approached. "What's going on here?" he demanded, eyeing Jace's bruised face and the other gang members hesitating nearby. "She attacked me!" Jace spat, clutching his ribs. "She—" "That's a lie," a voice interrupted. Amara turned to see an older man, the store owner, from across the street, stepping forward. "I saw everything from my window. This girl was defending herself." The officer turned to Amara. "Is that true?" Amara nodded. "They came at me first." Another officer cuffed Jace, forcing him to his feet. "We've had complaints about your little crew causing trouble around here," he said. "Looks like tonight's the night you finally answer for it." Jace scowled but didn't resist. He knew better. His gang had already abandoned him. The officer looked back at Amara. "You okay?" She nodded, though her heart was still racing. "Yeah, I'm fine." The store owner walked up to her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You stood up for yourself, kid. That takes guts." As the cops drove Jace away, Amara exhaled deeply. The fight was over for now. But something told her this wasn't the last time she'd have to face the consequences of standing her ground. The night was supposed to be over, but Amara knew better. Jace might be locked up, but his gang wasn't gone. As she walked home, she kept her senses sharp, her adrenaline still running high. She had won the fight, but something in her gut told her that this wasn't the end. When she got home, her uncle, Darnell, was waiting for her. A former Marine and the one who had trained her in self-defense, he could tell something was wrong the moment she stepped inside. "You're late," he said, arms crossed, "and you're bruised." Amara sighed, dropping her bag by the door. "Ran into some trouble." Darnell's face hardened. "What kind of trouble?" She hesitated. She didn't want to worry him, but she also knew she couldn't hide things from him. "A group of guys. They came after me. Jace and his crew." His jaw clenched. "And?" "I handled it," she said simply. Darnell stared at her for a moment before nodding. "I taught you well, but handling it once doesn't mean it's over." She knew he was right. Jace's gang wouldn't take this lightly. They'd be back, and next time, they wouldn't come at her one-on-one. "Stay sharp," Darnell warned. "You might have won this round, but real battles don't end that easy." Amara nodded. She wasn't afraid, but she wasn't stupid either. Jace's boys would want revenge, and she had to be ready. As she lay in bed that night, her mind raced. She had sent a message, but was it strong enough to make them back off? Or had she just made things worse? One thing was certain. This fight wasn't over. The next morning, Amara woke up with a clear mind and a plan. She knew Jace's gang wouldn't let things slide. They had too much pride, and guys like them thrived on intimidation. If they were coming back, she needed to be ready. She spent the day at her Uncle Darnell's gym, refining her technique. He watched as she ran through drills, her fists striking the heavy bag with precise, powerful blows. "You're planning something," Darnell said, arms crossed. Amara nodded, not bothering to deny it. "They're not done. I can feel it. I'd rather be prepared than caught off guard." Darnell sighed. "You're smart, kid. But remember, strength isn't just about fighting. It's about knowing when not to fight." Amara understood what he meant, but this wasn't a situation where words would work. Jace's crew only understood one thing: dominance. That evening, she got a text from an unknown number. "Meet us at the old train yard at midnight. Come alone." She smirked. Predictable. They wanted payback, and they wanted it on their turf. But Amara wasn't about to play by their rules. Instead of walking into an obvious trap, she called in a favor. Officer Ramirez, a local cop who had trained at her uncle's gym, owed her for teaching his daughter self-defense. When she explained the situation, he agreed to be nearby, watching, just in case things got out of hand. As the clock neared midnight, Amara dressed in dark clothes, laced up her boots, and slipped out of the house. It was time to finish this. She wasn't walking into a trap. She was setting one. Amara arrived at the abandoned train yard just before midnight. The air was thick with tension, the distant hum of the city barely reaching the desolate space. Shadows stretched across the cracked pavement, and in the dim moonlight, she spotted Jace and his gang waiting for her. "Glad you showed up," Jace sneered, cracking his knuckles. "Thought you'd be too scared." Amara smirked. "You don't know me at all, do you?" Jace's gang spread out, forming a semicircle around her. Amara's heart pounded, but her face remained calm. She had trained for this. Every movement, every reaction was already mapped out in her mind. Jace stepped forward, trying to intimidate her. "You embarrassed me in front of my crew. That ain't gonna fly." "I didn't embarrass you," Amara said, rolling her shoulders. "You did that all on your own." His face darkened with anger, and with a roar, he lunged at her. Amara dodged with ease, sidestepping his punch and delivering a sharp elbow to his ribs. He stumbled back, gasping in pain. One of his friends charged next, swinging wildly. Amara ducked, swept his legs out from under him, and sent him crashing to the ground. Another gang member grabbed a metal pipe, but before he could use it, blue and red lights flooded the area. Sirens wailed as Officer Ramirez and 2 other officers stormed in. "Everybody on the ground!" Ramirez shouted, his gun drawn. Jace's gang hesitated before dropping their weapons and raising their hands. They knew they were caught. Amara stepped back, breathing heavily. This was over. Ramirez walked up to her, shaking his head. "You knew they'd take the bait." Amara nodded. "They always do." Jace glared at her as he was handcuffed. "This ain't over." "Oh, it is," Amara replied. "For good." As the officers led Jace and his gang away, Amara finally let out a breath of relief. She had faced her worst fear, stood her ground, and won. This was her victory. If you were inspired by Amara's courage and determination, don't forget to like, share, and comment your thoughts below. What would you have done in her situation? 10,000. Subscribe for more powerful stories that challenge injustice and celebrate resilience.